Are you truly living life or merely surviving? Whether you want more time, more love, more money, or whether you want it all, we want to help you get there. The best part? Everything you want lies on the other side of fear and self-doubt. It's time to take the leap with your host, Tiffany Toombs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back for this week's episode of Take the Leap. I am your host, Tiffany Toombs, and this week I want to share with you why I took the leap. I often interview a lot of successful people who have taken the leap in their business, in their health, in their relationships, in any and every area of their life to find their best life. And we share their stories and their lessons with you. And a listener reached out to me recently and shared that I haven't actually shared my story on the podcast yet in full. And they wanted to know why I took the leap. So if we go back really to where my story begins that has led me to where I am today, it begins when I was about 3 or 4 years old. My mom and my biological dad were separated. My mom was remarried to my amazing stepdad, who is an incredible man that I'm incredibly grateful for. And I never really loved spending time with my biological dad. There was a lot of manipulation, and I think even from that young age, I recognized it, even if I didn't know the word that went with it. So I never willingly went with him on his weekends. To say that I had to be carried to the car kicking and screaming would be an understatement, but that is pretty much what happened. And when I was about 3 years old, he met this woman who was a domestic violence survivor. And the time that he met her, she was actually still living in a women's shelter with her 4 children, and she had been abused in her past 4 relationships. My biological dad represented the first time that there was no physical abuse for her. And so he would pick me up from my parents' house and we would drive down to downtown Calgary, and we'd pull up in front of this hideous pink stucco building. I could not get the color of the hideousness of this building out of my head if I tried. And this was before cell phones or anything were a thing. And so he would send me, the 3 or 4-year-old self of mine, into this women's shelter to get my stepmom to come out. He wasn't allowed to go in as a man. And this really became one of my first lessons of what it was to be a woman, where I'd walk into this place, and I'm somebody who is extremely sensitive to energy. I'd walk into this place and just see all these tortured and battered and abused women. And I decided from a very young age that being a woman was a weakness. I've since learned otherwise, but for a very long time I carried around that belief with me that being a woman was a weakness, and it came from seeing all these women at the worst time in their life. Now, the weekends that I was with my biological dad, he doted on me. I got bought whatever I wanted as a way of buying my love, and even though I didn't know the term manipulation back then, I was smart enough to know that I could get any Barbie that I wanted. And so I took full advantage. So he doted on me, and that meant that there was less attention on those weekends for my stepmom. And that didn't sit well with her. What I know now, with the training that I have now, is that her survival instinct kicked in. And so the abuse started small. I started getting locked in closets when my biological dad was at work or when he wasn't home. I would get burned with curling irons. And after a number of years of telling me that strangers hated blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls, which I am, she got upset with me one day for being a little bit too loud, I guess, shining a little bit too bright, whatever it was, when I was playing with my cousins. And so she put me into the car and she drove me to the outskirts of the city and told me to get out. And she was going to leave me there for a stranger to do whatever he or she wanted. So I was about 7 years old and I begged for my life. Now, what I learned from that time, when I was younger, I was a natural performer. I loved being in the spotlight, which is why I've naturally gravitated back to it. And so anything that looked like a stage, I was singing horribly, which I do still sing horribly, or I was dancing, or I was putting on an impromptu show, anything to entertain people and to make them happy. I've always loved to help make people happy. And so what I learned from that experience, because that day when I got put into the car, it wasn't that I was being bad. It wasn't that I was a rambunctious, naughty child. I was just being me. I was just drawing attention to me and putting on a play, and I could improv with anybody and for hours and hours on end just make up a play as we went. And so I learned in that experience that it wasn't good to be in the spotlight. In fact, your life could be in danger if you were in the spotlight. And even coming back to the spotlight 30 years later, that is something that comes up for me and that I've had to work on a lot to let go of, is to understand that it's okay to be in the spotlight. And are there going to be people who don't like me? Absolutely. At the same time, even if I didn't do anything, there would be people who didn't like me. So it's not a matter of being in the spotlight or not that draws negative attention. It's just other people expressing and projecting their own stuff. So when I was about 10, my stepmom decided she wanted to move back to the other side of Canada to be closer to her parents, and my biological dad decided to go with her. Now, even though I didn't particularly like him as a person, he still chose her over me. So not only was this person that was meant to love me unconditionally and protect me, that's the dad's role in your life, is to protect you. He was never there to protect me, and now he was choosing the woman who had abused me for so many years, choosing her over me. So I had all these abandonment issues. And I took some psychology classes, and I've always loved learning about the mind. So when I was in junior high and high school, I kind of knew this stuff was there, but I didn't want to be another girl with daddy issues. So I just shoved it down and covered myself up with big baggy clothes so that no one would notice me. I stood away from attention. I just stood in the shadows. I wanted to be the person in the background, even though I just still kind of naturally drew attention. And I would be like, no, don't look at me. Look at that person. And that really impacted my relationships for a long time, in that I felt like I wasn't good enough. And I developed this belief that any man who came into my life would leave. So I was constantly looking at reasons to be mad at my stepdad, constantly pushing him away, constantly pushing him to tell me that I wasn't good enough, or that, you know, he didn't really want me as his daughter, because that would then validate this belief I had in my head. And so I started a lot of fights with him in high school, because I was just so angry about being abandoned. And I was just so in survival mode for so many years that I was angry and I was exhausted. And this all came to a head when I was living in Australia. I had been dating someone for about 3 years. And just after the 3-year mark, he went out of town for a job interview to make more money at a job and be able to give me a better life. We had just put an offer in on a block of land. We were talking about getting married. Things were getting serious. We were, in our group of friends, like the perfect, ideal couple that even married couples would tell us, we want what you guys have. And after I dropped him off at the airport, I hadn't been feeling well, so I took a pregnancy test. The stick changed, and I was pregnant. And I found out within a matter of hours that he wasn't really at a job interview. He wasn't even in the city that he had told me he was going to. He was in a different city, in a different state, and he was with another woman. And my entire life collapsed around me. Now, at that point, I was paying the bulk of our rent and our bills, and I was living paycheck to paycheck to do so. And so I didn't have enough money to fly home and be coddled up in my mom's nurturing love, which is what I typically did anytime I'd had a breakup before. So now I was in a position where I had to be an adult and deal with it myself. And I was facing the ultimate abandonment. For 2 weeks, I couldn't eat or sleep. as I made my way through this life and all these other lies that had been told to me over the course of the 3 years came out. And so I ended up miscarrying the baby. And I was so embarrassed that I had been cheated on. And that not only had I been cheated on, but there was all these lies that I could just not see for 3 years. I'm a very intelligent person. And the fact that somebody had got one over on me consistently, like daily almost, for 3 years was embarrassing. And then I was pregnant, and I hadn't even been trying to get pregnant. It just happened. And even though I was kind of excited about what was going on with my body, I was embarrassed to tell anybody. So I told my now ex that I was pregnant, and then when I miscarried, I didn't tell anybody except for him. And I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. And shame does this to us. Shame tells us you can't tell anybody because they'll judge you even more. And in my head, I kept telling myself, people already think that you're an idiot for falling for someone who would lie to you about menial things like whether or not they had breakfast. And people are already judging you and like feeling sorry for you because you've been cheated on and your entire life has collapsed around you. They're going to think that you're a downright fool if you tell them that you've had a miscarriage as well. And so I didn't talk about it. Not for 6 months did I tell anybody. And so I was living in my own personal hell where I was imprisoned in my mind, just reliving this experience and this grief over and over and over again. And I didn't know how I was going to get out of those emotional depths. And I was standing on the corner in downtown Melbourne one day, and I saw a cab coming towards me. And I thought, I can just make this all go away. One perfectly timed step looks like an accident, and I don't have to be here anymore. I don't have to live this life that just keeps hurting me every single day. I can just end it. And so I'm mentally prepared, mentally committed. I'm going to do this. And as the cab got to the point where it needed to be, I went to take the step. And you can call it God or the universe or divine intervention, whatever you want to call it. My feet couldn't move. I was rooted to the ground. And the cab went on by and took the air out of my lungs with it. And I shrank back against the building behind me as I had like my life flashing before my eyes. It was a little bit late. It didn't happen before I almost took the step. It happened after. And I recognized that I still had so much more to live for. And that maybe all this stuff from my past, all this abuse, the bullying when I was in elementary and junior high, maybe all of those things I needed to deal with. Maybe I needed to tell somebody because I hadn't told anybody about the abuse that had happened to me. And so I started seeing a therapist, and that just brought it all back up to the surface. It did give me a new perspective. At that point in time, I hadn't considered what had happened to me as abuse. That was really the only thing that I got out of the therapy sessions was this new label for what had happened to me. And I decided that therapy wasn't working. It had just brought everything back up to the surface. So I needed to do something different. And that was when I took the leap into healing myself. And that was the most important leap I have ever taken in my life. I've taken multiple other leaps since then around starting my business. And if you listen to the episode, Stop Being a Selfish Bitch, I talk about what that whole leap was about. But really, the most important leap that I've ever taken in my life was the leap towards healing my inner turmoil, to healing those wounds, to no longer feel like I needed to run away from the demons in my closet, but I needed to stop and face them. Because the longer those demons lived there, the more angry they were making me, the more shut off from the world they were making me, the more that I felt like I had to put up this wall and this shield where when somebody asked me if I was okay, I became a master at painting a fake smile on my face and saying, I'm so great, when deep down inside, nothing was going right. And so I was angry and I was abusive. I was a bully. I was a bully to myself. I was a bully to other people. I had a short fuse. And if you said it, you didn't even have enough time to get out of the room or to take 2 steps away from me before I went off. And so that really helped me to understand how generational abuse happens and how it gets passed on. And I knew that if I wanted to make a difference in this world, if I really wanted to help people, the thing that I've been passionate about more in my life than anything else that I've done, it started with me. I had to heal my own demons, and I had to stop bleeding over other people who hadn't caused my wounds. And this is what happens in society, is that people have a wound and they feel helpless against the person who caused it. Maybe that person's their mom or their boss or they're a grandparent or someone that they feel like they can't stand up to and set a boundary with. And so they take that wound and they bleed all over someone else. They bleed over someone else who feels helpless to stop and set a boundary with them. And so it just becomes this vicious cycle where we're all bleeding all over somebody who didn't cause our own wound. And so my journey of healing led me to a lot of things that didn't work. I found all the wrong things first. And ultimately, it led me to finding NLP and matrix therapies and having the ability to reframe my mind, to rewire my mind, and to understand what was working and what wasn't, allowed me the greatest freedom I've ever had in my life. And even when I first moved back to Canada after 8 years in Australia, my family knew me as the angry person. And so when something happened, you could see them like preparing, like taking shelter behind this invisible wall to stop from Mount Tiffany erupting. And I remember the first Christmas I moved back, it was about a week after I'd been home, and something happened. I had to get snow tires or something on my car, and the timing didn't work out with the dealership, and that it was going to delay it a couple days, which impacted my ability to drive anywhere. And instead of erupting, I just went, okay, well, it is what it is. And my family just looked at me with this strange look and stared, like jaw on the floor, staring at me. Who are you? And I was like, what? And they were like, oh, maybe you really have changed. And that was the point where I recognized like just how far I'd come. And so my greatest lessons from my journey were that there's a whole lot of things that we tell ourselves to be true throughout our life that are total BS. The not good enough, the I'm not worthy, the I was abused or bullied or picked on because I'm not good enough. The people who do that to you, that has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your worth. It has nothing to do with your likability. They're telling you how they feel about themselves. And in fact, what I honestly believe is that when people start picking on you or pushing you down, whether that's physically or metaphorically, it's because they actually see the light in you. They see how amazing and how great you are, like little Tiffany was. And they are jealous of that. It makes them uncomfortable because they don't see that light in themselves. The funny thing is that in NLP, we have the concept of perception as projection, which means that what I see in you, I only know exists because it exists within me. And so those people who see your light or my light or someone's light, and they feel the need to put them down because they don't feel like they have the light in themselves, they do. It might be a tiny, 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 tiny little spark, but it's still there. And rather than figuring out how to turn their own spark into this raging flame of passion and love and being healed, they think it's easier to blow out somebody else's spark. So that was one of my greatest lessons, was that we have all of this stuff inside us that we hold on to and we believe to be true, and really it's nothing more than a bunch of BS. The second lesson that I want to leave you with from my story is that shame will cause you to go quiet. Shame will tell you that you can't share your story, that it will lead to more bullying, more not good enough, more of all the things that are causing the shame in the first place. And I want you to know that the only way that we get shame to go away is to start sharing our story. I've had so many people reach out to me, whether they've read my book or they've attended one of my workshops or listened to a podcast interview that I've done, or they've seen an article or a post that I've written somewhere on social media sharing my story. And they always thank me for being so vulnerable and so willing to share my story. And the truth is the only way that we find ourselves back to each other, the only way we can truly reconnect and heal and break the generational cycles is to stop letting shame rule us and to start sharing our stories. We all have shame. And as soon as we recognize that that's part of the human condition that attempts to break us apart, and if we let instead those vulnerabilities and those pains and those wounds bring us together to heal, then we'll go a lot further together than we ever can as an individual. So that's it for me today. That is why I took the leap. And as I said, I've taken the leap many times, but the most important leap that I ever took was into looking at myself, facing my demons. And when you turn around and face your demons, when you open up the closet and start taking the skeletons out one by one, they become a whole lot less scary and they have less power over you. And so if you want to truly start to live your best life, if you want to truly heal and find out your potential, to find out what light exists in you, you have to look inside. And I've put together a 10-day training to help you do just that. You can head over to www.limitlessplaybook.com. It's a free 10-day training over there that will help you start to unpack that shame, start to unpack those skeletons in the closet so that you can heal and become a better version of yourself. Not even a better version of yourself. I don't even like that phrase. Become the truest version of yourself. The version of yourself that you are when you take off the wounds, when you clean off the blood that somebody else has bled all over you. That's who your true self is. Your soul level self. And you deserve to figure out and to find that connection with yourself and to heal those wounds. So check out www.limitlessplaybook.com. If you are listening on iTunes, I would love for you to leave us a review so that we can share this information on how to live your best life by taking the leap with more people around the world. And I will be back next week with an incredible interview from another highly successful person who has taken the leap in their own life. Have an amazing week, and I will talk to you all again soon.